You can't really turn on the news these days without just being hit by the reality of global conflict, can you?
No, it's everywhere.
Yemen, Israel, and Palestine, that awful war in Eastern Europe. I mean, destruction on a scale we haven't seen there since World War II.
Mhm.
It's easy to feel a bit powerless.
It really is.
But what if there was a way to maybe get ahead of it? A proactive approach?
Well, that's exactly what we're looking into today.
Right. This idea of a global peace alliance, the GPA, it comes from your source, the Global Peace Alliance, published just last year, 2025, by Athena Publishing.
That's the one. It's a really interesting document, authored by Kizzi Nkwocha, but researched by a whole team.
And his background is quite relevant, isn't it? A refugee himself.
Yes, from the Nigeria-Biafra War, plus his work, with Amnesty International, representing figures like the King of Uganda, it definitely informs his perspective.
Gives it weight.
It does. Now, the book aims to be educational, engaging.
Hmm.
It does have the usual disclaimers about professional advice, liability, that sort of thing.
Standard stuff.
But the core idea is really powerful. This strong belief that nations acting together can actually forge peace. It kind of flips that old saying, si vis pacem para bellum.
If you want peace, prepare for war.
Right. But here, the preparation is through unity. Unified strength to prevent war.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack this GPA concept. We'll look at the arguments the book makes for and against.
Exactly. Weighing it against the reality of conflict today.
We need to figure out where current peacekeeping, well, falls short, and then really get into the details of this GPA, how it would work, the potential roadblocks.
The goal is really to pull out the key insights for you, the listener, so you can get a solid handle on this proposed solution for, well, global instability.
Great, let's dive in. So the book starts by painting a pretty stark picture of where we are now conflict-wise.
It really does. No pulling punches. It jumps right into the grim realities we see every day. The humanitarian disaster in Yemen, that awful, seemingly endless cycle of violence in Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, and Ukraine, of course.
And the Russia-Ukraine conflict, yes. It stresses the sheer scale, but also the ripple effects. The economic instability, the millions displaced, and maybe most worrying, the erosion of trust in international bodies, the ones meant to stop this.
It's a bleak starting point. But then the book pivots. It brings up a really powerful historical parallel. Operation Overlords, D-Day, June 6, 1944.
A huge turning point.
And the numbers it mentions are just staggering. Over 156,000 troops hitting the beaches on that one day. Almost 7,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft involved. It's hard to even picture.
It was monumental.
Yeah.
And the book really emphasizes it wasn't just brute force, it was this incredible example of international cooperation.
Right, it wasn't just one country.
No. The U.S. brought huge numbers, resources, sure, but the U.K.'s Navy and Air Force were absolutely crucial. Canada's role on Juno Beach was vital. And then you had forces from Australia, New Zealand, France, Poland, so many others.
A truly unified effort.
Exactly. Against a common enemy. That's the power it highlights.
And the book is clear, this wasn't accidental. It took meticulous planning, intense collaboration between leaders like Eisenhower and Montgomery.
Absolutely. It wasn't just military tactics, it was deep diplomatic work, too. Managing those complex relationships to keep everyone focused on the goal, defeating the Axis powers.
And what's the key lesson the book draws from this? It seems to be about the danger of not acting, right?
Precisely. It reminds us what was at stake. Nazi Germany, Hitler's regime, the occupation of Europe, the Holocaust, 6 million Jews murdered, millions more killed.
Unthinkable horrors.
And the book argues if the Allies hadn't united, hadn't acted decisively, Nazi rule could have spread even further. The atrocities would have continued, international law would have collapsed, just like the League of Nations failed before it.
So the GPA is framed as a kind of modern version of that coalition spirit.
Sort of, yes. Inspired by overlords, but adapted for today's threats. Terrorism, climate change impacts, pandemics, these messy regional conflicts.
The aim being prevention, diplomacy, and fostering development as a way to build peace.
Exactly. And the book draws a key distinction between the GPA and, say, the UN. It emphasizes this proactive element, collective defense.
Not just reacting after the fact.
Right. Having standing rapid response teams ready to go, delivering aid quickly, getting involved in mediation early before things escalate. It's about pooling strengths.
Okay, so we've got the current grim picture and this powerful historical example of success. But the book looks at other coalitions too, doesn't it? To find more lessons for the GPA.
It does. It examines 3 other key historical coalitions. First, the ones against Napoleon back in the early 19th century.
What's the takeaway there?
It highlights how it was a combination of military and economic power. The British Navy's blockade was critical, economically crippling Napoleon.
While Prussia and Austria provided the ground troops.
Exactly. And the result of their eventual success, the Congress of Vienna. It set up a diplomatic system that, remarkably, kept relative peace in Europe for almost 100 years.
And the flip side? If they hadn't acted.
The book suggests continued Napoleonic dominance, more wars, suppressed national identities, authoritarianism spreading across Europe. High stakes.
Okay, example 2.
World War I. The Allied powers UK, France, Russia, Italy, Japan, and later, crucially, the US against the Central Powers.
Germany, Austria, Hungary, the Ottoman Empire.
Right. The book points to the importance of pooling resources, fighting on multiple fronts, like the Western and Eastern fronts, and it really stresses how the U.S. entering the war tipped the balance.
And the what-if scenario there.
Probable German dominance in Europe, the collapse of democracies, more authoritarianism, continued imperial exploitation. Again, the consequences of inaction would have been immense.
And the third example, more recent, right?
Yes, the Gulf War coalition in 1990-91, after Iraq invaded Kuwait. This was a UN-backed coalition, 35 nations strong.
Led by the U.S., but lots of others involved.
UK, France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, South Korea. A very diverse group. The book points to the military effectiveness, but also the international cooperation aspect. U.S. troops, yes, but also big financial contributions from countries like Saudi Arabia and Japan.
And if they hadn't intervened?
The book argues it could have destabilized the entire Middle East, emboldened other aggressors, and massively disrupted global energy markets. Huge economic and political fallout.
So looking across Napoleon, WWI, the Gulf War, what are the core principles the book pulls out for a potential GPA?
Well, first and foremost, it seems to be about unity of purpose, a real shared commitment to the goal. That seems absolutely critical.
Makes sense. What else?
Effective resource sharing, combining military, economic, diplomatic strengths, making the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
Like different countries bringing different things to the table.
Precisely. Then the importance of diplomatic frameworks, like the Congress of Vienna or the UN itself. You need places to talk, coordinate, build agreement. Proactive measures. The idea that acting early, decisively, can stop conflicts from blowing up, saving countless lives and resources. These historical lessons really build the case for why a new kind of alliance might be needed now.
Which sets us up perfectly for the next part, where the current UN peacekeeping model falls short, according to the book. We all know the UN tries, but where does the book say it often struggles?
Well, it acknowledges the good intentions, absolutely, but it argues that effectiveness is often, frankly, crippled by the competing political agendas of the big players.
Especially on the Security Council.
Exactly. The Security Council too often becomes a stage for rivalry. The veto power held by the permanent 5 members that can just paralyze action, delay things indefinitely, block vital interventions.
Syria comes to mind immediately.
Syria is the textbook. Tragic example the book uses. Total paralysis, inability to agree on a strong response, leading to this unbelievable humanitarian catastrophe. It also mentions the initial hesitancy in the international response to Russia's aggression in Ukraine, a sense that maybe a stronger, more unified stance was needed earlier.
It's incredibly frustrating, isn't it? The very body, designed for peace, gets gridlocked by its most powerful members.
It is. And the book also points out the nature of war itself has changed dramatically.
How so?
It's not always nation versus nation anymore. You've got non-state actors, extremist groups, militias, and then there's this rise of hybrid warfare.
Right, that mix of conventional fighting with cyber attacks, disinformation.
Exactly. It blends military tactics with cyber, propaganda, economic pressure. It deliberately blurs the lines. That makes it incredibly tough for traditional peacekeeping forces, often set up for simpler state-on-state scenarios, to even know how to respond effectively.
It's not just about soldiers and tanks anymore.
Not at all. How does a traditional peacekeeper stop a sophisticated disinformation campaign? Or trace a cyber attack designed to look like it came from somewhere else? It requires different skills, different approaches.
And the book hammers home the human cost of these failures, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Millions displaced, economies shattered for decades, generations growing up knowing only conflict, losing out on education, opportunity. It really underscores the massive stakes, why we need something better.
Which leads into the book detailing that human cost even further. It lists, well, a horrifying number of ongoing conflicts as of 2025.
It does. Myanmar, Arab-Israeli conflict, the Sahel insurgency, Sudan, Ukraine, Ethiopia, Colombia, Somalia, Afghanistan, Nigeria, DRC, Yemen, Syria. It's a long, deeply disturbing list, a snapshot of just how unstable things are.
It's overwhelming just hearing the list, and then he gets
Ah.
into the specifics, the direct
Yes,
casualties.
the numbers are just devastating. Yeah. Over 500,000 deaths in Syria since 2011, around 377,000 Yemen since 2014, from fighting, but also disease and starvation.
In the DRC, over 6 million deaths since the late 90s.
An almost unimaginable figure, often linked to the fight over mineral resources with armed groups committing terrible atrocities. These aren't just statistics, they're individual lives, families destroyed.
And then there's the displacement, people forced to flee.
Huge numbers. Syria, again, over 13 million forced from their homes. Inside Syria or spilling into Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, putting immense strain on those countries.
Yemen, 4 million internally displaced. The Rohingya, over 740,000 fleeing to Bangladesh since 2017, living in desperate camp conditions.
And Sudan, the recent conflict since April 23. Already millions displaced, famine looming, refugees pouring into Chad, which can barely cope. These mass movements reshape entire regions.
And lead directly to humanitarian crises, right? Food, water, healthcare shortages.
It becomes the norm. The book details the awful situations in Yemen, Syria, South Sudan, but also the DRC, Central African Republic, Somalia, those Rohingya camps.
Right.
People struggling just to survive day to day.
The impact on children is particularly brutal. Education is often the first casualty.
It is. Syria again.
Huh?
UNICEF figures show over 12,000 children killed or injured since 2011. 2.5 million out of school. The long-term damage is incalculable.
And disease outbreaks. Conflict zones are breeding grounds, aren't they?
Because healthcare systems just collapse. The book mentions Afghanistan's struggles with polio, its weak COVID response. Somalia, where facilities are destroyed, doctors flee, leading to high death rates from preventable illnesses.
And even deliberate targeting of hospitals, like in Libya.
Yes, making already terrible situations even worse.
Then there are the economic costs. Just the physical destruction is immense.
Huge. Over $20 billion in damage estimated in Yemen, over $100 billion in Iraq from the war there. Infrastructure, roads, power, water just obliterated.
And the disruption to trade, to normal economic life, Ukraine's lost GDP estimated at $280 billion.
A staggering immediate impact. And the book also looks at the economic strain on Russia, the daily war costs, the sanctions, GDP contraction, debt piling up.
But the long-term economic damage for conflict zones is maybe even worse.
It takes decades to recover, if ever. The book cites estimates for Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan. Decades just to get back to where they were before the wars began. It shows conflict isn't just a human tragedy, it's an economic catastrophe for everyone involved, and even indirectly for the rest of the world.
Which brings us back to that idea of the changing nature of conflict. It's not just state versus state anymore.
Right. That's becoming rarer. It's more fragmented now, messier, less predictable.
And this hybrid warfare idea is central to that change.
Definitely. That blend of conventional military action with non-conventional tactics, disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressure.
Russia and Ukraine being the prime example.
Yes, the book uses that extensively. The cyber attacks, the propaganda, supporting separatists before the main invasion. It creates ambiguity, makes a coordinated response really hard.
And then there's the rise of private military contractors, PMCs. The book highlights their growing role.
It does, and it includes some quite stark figures on their casualties, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Around 3,000 deaths by late 2012, nearly 30% of U.S. battlefield losses. That's significant.
Very significant. It shows how much warfare has been, well, outsourced in some ways. The book also mentions specific contractor deaths in Iraq, showing the scale.
And the Wagner Group gets specific mention too. Ukraine, Africa.
Yes, with U.S. estimates of heavy casualties for them in Ukraine and reports of serious abuses against civilians in places like Mali.
Plus this trend of recruiting experienced soldiers from places like Colombia for global conflicts.
It points to a global market for military skills, often driven by economic need.
So all this hybrid warfare, PMCs, poses huge challenges for traditional peacekeeping, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Peacekeepers need new skills. Cyber experts, intelligence analysts, people who understand disinformation. And how do you hold PMCs accountable? Who oversees them?
It demands a whole new way of thinking about international cooperation.
Exactly. These threats cross borders. You need coordinated intelligence sharing, joint cyber defenses, collective capabilities that go way beyond just sending troops. Traditional peacekeeping has to evolve.
The book then uses regional examples to illustrate this complexity in Eastern Europe.
Ukraine, obviously. Territorial disputes, big power rivalries. The human cost, the global economic
But
impact,
Africa, specifically the Sahel.
weak governments, climate change pressures, extremist groups spreading. It's a toxic mix creating transnational threats. Somalia's long conflict is another example.
And the Middle East, always complex.
Deeply complex. External powers meddling, local rivalries intertwined with global ones, U.S. versus Russia versus Iran and Syria and Yemen, NATO support for Ukraine. It's a tangled web.
And the key point is how interconnected it all is, right? Problems spill over.
Massively. Refugee flows from Syria hitting Europe, the Ukraine war impacting food security in Africa, instability in the Sahel affecting international security. You can't just deal with these things in isolation anymore. Reactive approaches just don't cut it.
Which leads us back to the failures of traditional peacekeeping, looking at specific examples. The Security Council's limitations again.
Yes, the political gridlock caused by the veto, Syria being the ongoing example. But the book revisits historical failures too. Srebrenica, 1995.
Bosnia, the UN safe area, that wasn't safe at all.
Lightly armed Dutch peacekeepers, an inadequate mandate. They couldn't stop the Bosnian Serb army from marching in and massacring thousands of men and boys, a horrific failure.
And Rwanda, 1994.
Another terrible stain. The UN mission, UNIMIR, was there. They had warnings about the planned genocide, but they were understaffed, under-resourced, with a mandate that tied their hands. They couldn't prevent the slaughter of 800,000 people.
It's hard to even comprehend those failures.
And the book argues it often comes down to restrictive mandates. Peacekeepers aren't allowed to use force effectively, even when civilians are clearly at risk.
Like UNIFIL in Lebanon, unable to stop Hezbollah arming.
That's one example it gives. Or UNMIS in South Sudan in 2016, failing to respond adequately to attacks on civilians in Juba because of mandate and resource issues.
And the lack of accountability when things go wrong. Rwanda seems like the ultimate example of the Security Council just failing to act.
A catastrophic failure to authorize intervention, despite clear warnings. Plus, UN forces are often fragmented to different countries, different training, different equipment, and deployment can be painfully slow.
Like MINUSMA in Mali, getting attacked before they were even fully set up.
Exactly. By the time forces arrive in strength, the situation may have deteriorated badly.
And finally, the book criticizes the focus on short-term fixes, not root causes.
Right, trying to put a lid on the violence temporarily, rather than tackling the underlying issues: bad governance, inequality, resource conflicts.
Like in the DRC, where the focus wasn't enough on governance or resource issues.
Or Afghanistan, where massive military spending wasn't matched by efforts to tackle corruption or build a sustainable economy, which ultimately helped the Taliban return.
So, after detailing those failures, the book revisits the consequences of inaction, but with a wider lens. Refugee flows again.
But emphasizing the strain on host countries. Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan with Syrians, European countries with Ukrainians, and the political fallout, the debates over immigration.
And the global economic hit. Ukraine affecting food and energy prices worldwide.
It really drives home that interconnectedness. Conflict anywhere affects trade, production, prices everywhere, hitting vulnerable people hardest.
So the argument is tackling root causes isn't just charity, it's an investment in global stability.
Exactly. Peace in the Middle East reduces refugee pressures and economic burdens elsewhere. Resolving the Ukraine conflict stabilizes energy and food markets for everyone. It's self-interest, really, on a global scale.
But the book doesn't only focus on failures, it does highlight some peacekeeping successes, right, where things actually worked.
Yes, absolutely. Part 8 offers that crucial counterbalance. It shows that robust, well-supported missions can make a real difference. Sierra Leone is a key example. UNIMSIL, 1999-2005.
That was a particularly brutal civil war, wasn't it? Child soldiers, terrible atrocities.
Horrific. But UNAMSIL got a strong mandate. They could use force when needed. They worked closely with regional players like ECOWAS. They had significant troop numbers.
And they achieved results.
Significant ones. Disarmed 75,000 fighters, oversaw successful elections in 2002, protected civilians. The country's been relatively stable since. The book credits that robust mandate, regional cooperation, and strong international backing.
What other successes does it mention?
UN TAG in Namibia, 1989-90, overseeing the transition to independence from South Africa.
That must have been complex.
Very. But again, a clear, comprehensive mandate, monitor the ceasefire, ensure free elections, support reconciliation. And it worked. Namibia's been a stable democracy since.
East Timor. UNTAE, 1999-2002, after the violence following the independence vote.
Another success. A very broad mandate there included governance, law and order, humanitarian aid. They basically helped build the new state, established administration, ran elections, drafted a constitution, trained police.
Paved the way for independence.
Yeah. Exactly. Comprehensive mandate, international cooperation, clear goals, key factors again.
And Liberia. UNMIL, 2003-2018, another long, brutal civil war.
Yes. And UNMIL also had a robust mandate, authorized use of force, large troop numbers, military, police, civilian elements working together.
And its achievements?
Disarmed over 100,000 combatants. Provided security for elections in 2005 and 2011. Helped stabilize the country significantly.
So looking at Sierra Leone, Namibia, East Timor, Liberia, what are the common threads? What makes peacekeeping work when it does work?
Robust mandates are clearly crucial. The ability to act decisively, effective coordination with locals, with regional bodies, and sustained international support, both political and financial.
And the GPA is proposed as building on these lessons.
Precisely, taking what worked in these cases and trying to overcome the systemic weaknesses of the current UN model. More centralized command, faster decision-making, rapid response, stronger enforcement, and that consistent focus on long-term solutions, on root causes.
Okay, this brings us right to the core arguments for the GPA itself. Part 9. It starts with urgency, the moral case for action.
It really does. It hammers home the unacceptable human and economic toll of just letting conflicts fester. It frames it as a moral duty to protect civilians.
Saying every preventable death is a failure.
A failure of the international community. And it speaks for those suffering silently, demanding justice and protection they aren't getting.
And it backs this up with stark statistics, doesn't it? The sheer scale of war's devastation.
Over 187 million war deaths in the 20th century, at least 40 million more since WWII. Civilians making up 50–90% of casualties in modern wars.
Horrifying numbers.
And recent figures too, Ukraine casualties and displacement. The global total of 114 million forcibly displaced in 2023. Syria, Sudan. The numbers are overwhelming.
Contrasted with huge military spending, over $2 trillion globally in 2021.
While conflict costs the global economy trillions every year, the book points out the potential economic benefits of peace, a 10% GDP boost if violence is absent, according to the Institute for Economics and Peace, compared to the UN peacekeeping budget of around $6.5 billion in 2023.
It makes a powerful ethical argument, too. Action isn't just about stopping current horrors, but securing the future.
Yes, preventing those lasting scars on children, breaking those cycles of despair that trap communities for generations. It's about building a more just future.
And the book stresses the need for public support for any global peacekeeping effort, right?
Absolutely critical. For funding, for troop contributions, for legitimacy. Public backing influences governments.
How does it assess current public opinion?
Generally supportive of the UN in many places, strong support in the EU, mixed in the US support for the idea, but skepticism about cost and effectiveness. African nations often supportive but critical of specific shortcomings.
What influences that support?
Perceived effectiveness successes, like Sierra Leone, help. Cost is a big factor, especially in the US. The moral case resonates, and media coverage plays a huge role. Rwanda's genocide definitely shifted public opinion.
So the GPA would need to win public trust.
Essential for its success. It needs legitimacy, funding, participation. But perceived past failures like Srebrenica or Rwanda and cost concerns are definite challenges it would have to overcome. It needs to show its learned lessons and can be effective.
The book then revisits the system's failures with more examples, like Darfur.
Yes, Darfur. Conflict since 2003, hundreds of thousands dead, millions displaced. The UNAMID mission faced huge obstacles. The response was seen as slow, ineffective. Another example of delayed, inadequate action.
And it highlights the role of civil society. Groups like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch.
As vital agents of change, they amplify victims' voices, advocate for action, hold institutions accountable, mobilize the public. Their work shows there's a global appetite for better alternatives to war.
The book uses the eradication of smallpox as an analogy for successful global cooperation.
A powerful example. Led by the WHO, countries put aside differences for a common goal. It shows what's possible with unified vision and action. Tangible results inspire further cooperation.
So unity isn't just idealistic, it's a practical strategy.
Exactly. For disease, for climate change, and, the book argues, for war. It requires unwavering cooperation.
Which leads us into the deep dive on the Middle East Part 10 as a critical, complex case study for why something like the GPA might be needed. It starts with historical context.
Crucial context. The Ottoman Empire's collapse, The Sykes-Picot Agreement carving things up, colonialism's impact, creating states with unresolved issues from the start.
So current problems, sectarianism, authoritarianism, have deep roots.
Deep roots in arbitrary borders, fractured societies, foreign meddling, lack of trust. It shows why new approaches are needed, ones that tackle these long-standing issues.
What are the key factors the book says fuel today's conflicts there?
A whole mix. Sectarianism, Sunni-Shia divisions exploited politically in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. The Saudi-Iran rivalry playing out in proxy wars like Yemen and Syria.
Authoritarianism, too.
Yes, repression, lack of freedom, silencing dissent. We saw the backlash in the Arab Spring with varied, often tragic, results in Egypt, Syria, Libya.
Foreign intervention is a big one.
Huge. The region's strategic importance means powers like the U.S., Russia, Europe are always involved militarily, economically, diplomatically. Syria is a prime example of a proxy battlefield. Regional powers like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey also fund different sides.
Resource competition. Oil, water.
Oil has always been a factor. Wealth, corruption, interference. The Gulf War is an example. Now, water scarcity is becoming critical, worsened by climate change, leading to disputes over rivers like the Tigris, Euphrates, Nile.
And non-state actors.
ISIS, Hezbollah, the Houthis, operating outside state control, filling vacuums, exploiting grievances. They add another layer of complexity.
Plus the aftermath of the Arab Spring disillusionment, power vacuums.
Exactly. In Yemen, Libya, leading to more chaos, extremism. It's this complex interplay of factors that makes the region so volatile and resistant to easy solutions.
The book digs into the role of those external powers more deeply. U.S., Russia, China.
Yes, their long history of influence due to location and energy, often prioritizing their own interests, which fuels mistrust. The U.S. focuses on allies, counterterrorism, Israel's security. Russia wants influence, energy deals. China's focus is more economic, Belt and Road. Energy needs trying to stay neutral in conflicts, but supporting some authoritarian regimes, which raises concerns.
And oil's influence specifically, beyond just being a prize.
It fuels internal power struggles, like in Iraqi Kurdistan over resource control. Sanctions targeting oil, like against Iran, are used as leverage. And now natural gas in the Eastern Mediterranean is becoming another strategic factor.
The impact of non-state actors like Hezbollah and the Houthis gets more detail too.
Hezbollah in Lebanon, blurring lines between political party and powerful militia. The Houthis in Yemen, seizing the capital, fighting a regional coalition, fragmenting the state further. They fundamentally change conflict dynamics.
And the Arab Spring, the book, looks at its legacy, hope and disappointment.
Both. The initial uprisings demanding dignity and rights, the violent crackdowns by regimes in places like Bahrain and Yemen, the role of external powers backing different sides, then the aftermath, disillusionment, economic problems, extremism rising in the chaos in Libya and Yemen, huge refugee crises, but also a lasting impact. That desire for representation hasn't gone away.
Which feeds into the refugee crisis section, Syria as the epicenter.
Yes, massive displacement. Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan bearing the brunt, immense pressure on them, ripple effects into Europe, dire conditions in camps like Zaatari, the impact on children, the long-term problems, lack of status, opportunities, strain on host nations. It all points to needing international cooperation and addressing root causes.
Economic disparities are another major factor discussed.
High unemployment, especially among youth, rural-urban gaps,
Yeah.
economies wrecked by conflict like Iraq and Syria, failed economic policies, corruption, uneven oil wealth distribution, and that growing water scarcity hitting agriculture and daily life.
Then there's media and information warfare, propaganda, disinformation.
Powerful tools, amplified by digital media, state control outlets, but also social media manipulation, bots, trolls. The book compares it to Russian tactics in Ukraine. It undermines trust, spreads lies rapidly.
Social media was used for resistance too, though, in the Arab Spring.
True, it cuts both ways. But combating disinformation is hard, balancing regulation and free speech, the limits of fact-checking. The book stresses needing independent media, international cooperation, and media literacy.
The arms trade gets a look too, the Middle East as a huge market.
Heavily militarized. Major buyers of arms from the U.S., Russia, China, Europe. This fuels violence, obviously. The book mentions things like intercepting Iranian ships with potential missile components. It makes de-escalation much harder, increases lethality, like in Yemen.
What about regional organizations? The Arab League, GCC?
Often limited, the book suggests, the Arab League struggles for unity due to competing interests. Syria's suspension is an example. The GCC focuses on economy and security, played a role in Yemen's transition. But internal divisions, like the Qatar crisis, undermine it.
And that youth bulge challenge or opportunity.
Both. High unemployment, Lack of political voice, inequality breeds frustration, potential radicalization, but huge potential if they get opportunities. Education, jobs, inclusion. We saw their energy in the Arab Spring, and there's growing entrepreneurship.
Foreign aid's impact is complex too, isn't it?
Very, often tied to donors' political agendas. Military aid might prop up authoritarian regimes. Economic reform conditions can cause unrest. It can create dependency, disconnect rulers from the ruled. Aid can even become a tool in rivalries, like arguably in Yemen. The key is prioritizing local needs, transparency, sustainability.
But the book ends the Middle East section on a more hopeful note. Cultural resilience, civil society.
Yes, highlighting grassroots peace efforts, organizations in Lebanon bridging divides, interfaith dialogue, education programs in Iraq, women peace builders in Yemen, drawing parallels with Northern Ireland, South Africa. These groups tap into shared values, counter extremism, build trust. They face repression, lack resources, but need support that respects local leadership.
Okay, so understanding that deep complexity, especially in the Middle East, really sets the stage for Part 11. Imagining this new framework, the GPA, in action. How would it overcome UN gridlock?
The idea is a standing force. Contributions from all UN members, bypassing the Security Council veto with a clearer mandate, more streamlined decision-making, though obviously it still needs cooperation and trust.
And tackling modern warfare. Transnational networks, proxy wars, advanced weapons.
The GPA is envisioned as having the capacity for rapid, comprehensive, coordinated intervention. To handle that complexity, prevent escalation.
What are its core principles as laid out?
Universal membership for legitimacy. Shared accountability. Proactive intervention, getting ahead of crises. Rapid response capability, addressing root causes, not just symptoms. Impartiality. Respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. And a strong human rights focus.
How would it be funded? That's always a huge question.
The book suggests equitable cost sharing among members. Maybe contributions from financial institutions, offering economic or diplomatic perks for contributors, engaging the private sector, philanthropy, incentivizing investment in peace.
Then it gets into simulating GPA interventions,
Yeah.
different scenarios. Civil war.
Rapid deployment, protect civilians, deliver aid, support a democratic transition with international oversight.
A proxy war, like Yemen.
Naval blockade enforcement against arms smuggling. Neutralizing missile threats. Securing aid routes. Pressuring external backers. Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE with sanctions. Bringing local leaders into peace talks. Overseeing federalization. Investing in resource projects.
Failed state with extremism.
Coordinated air-ground ops against extremists, but avoiding long occupations. Partnering with vetted local forces. Creating stability hubs for governance, education, economy. Expanding gradually. Transferring power to a transitional government meeting human rights standards.
What about something like Ethiopia's Tigray conflict?
Rapid deployment to stop massacres, block arms, isolate a conflict zone, enforce a ceasefire. Broker talks, insisting external forces like Eritrea withdraw. Sponsored truth and reconciliation. Offer economic incentives like cross-border infrastructure projects.
The Sahel insurgency.
A dual approach. Counterinsurgency, maybe using tech like AI for precision, plus development delivering peace dividends like clinics, wells, schools. Working with Interpol on illicit finance. Offering alternative livelihoods.
Even Latin America dealing with drug cartels.
Combining specialized law enforcement units with social development. Intelligence sharing. Investing in marginalized communities. Supporting peace deal implementation, like in Colombia.
So the approach to extremism is military action plus development.
Yes. Precision military action against networks combined with long-term efforts, education, healthcare, economic opportunity to tackle the root causes of radicalization.
Part 12 then gets practical. How do you actually build this thing? The steps, the obstacles, initial steps.
Diplomatic spadework. UN General Assembly resolutions to build consensus and mandate. Setting up a preparatory committee with diverse representation.
And dealing with political resistance, some countries won't like this.
Key strategies mentioned are arguing that collective security enhances national security for everyone, having clear, agreed protocols for approving missions, addressing economic or geopolitical concerns head-on, maybe compensation, maybe incentives, ensuring transparency and oversight to build trust, constant diplomatic engagement, and appealing to public opinion globally.
What about the huge financial and logistical hurdles?
Need a sustainable funding model, equitable contributions, developing rapid deployment infrastructure, maybe regional hubs, reliable supply chains, medical support, communications. Again, transparency and accountability are key. Audits, reporting, partnerships, and framing the GPA as ultimately cheaper than the cost of endless conflict. Strategic partnerships with regional groups and the private sector could also help.
And fostering global unity, getting everyone on board.
Public education campaigns, using technology for early warning and better coordination, cultural diplomacy, strengthening regional organizations as partners, emphasizing that long-term security comes through cooperation.
Which leads to the final part, part 13, the road ahead, a call to action, redefining peacekeeping itself.
From reactive to proactive, addressing root causes seriously, integrating development, governance, security efforts from the start,
And redefining global diplomacy alongside it.
making it more inclusive, equitable, empowering smaller states, linking interventions to economic stabilization, promoting regional cooperation, engaging citizens' worldwide public diplomacy, and insisting on accountability and justice, like through transitional justice mechanisms.
So the final thought is the GPA isn't just a nice idea, it's a necessary evolution.
That's the core message. In our interconnected, complex world, the old ways aren't enough. The GPA is presented as a pragmatic necessity for a more stable, just future, achievable through collective action.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the key takeaway for you, our listener, from the Global Peace Alliance is really this strong case for a shift, moving towards a proactive, unified, better resourced approach to global peace.
One that acknowledges the shortcomings of what we have now and tries to tackle the deep roots of conflict more effectively.
For me, digging into this, that statistic about Syrian displacement, over 13 million people, just keeps sticking in my mind. It's such a stark reminder of the human cost when we've failed to prevent or resolve these conflicts.
And knowing you value getting up to speed on complex issues quickly but thoroughly, we really hope this deep dive has given you a solid understanding of what the GPA proposes and why. A shortcut to being informed on this potential path forward.
As you think about all this, maybe consider this question we touched upon. What do you think is the biggest single barrier to real, effective global cooperation when it comes to peace and security? The book offers ideas, but there's no easy answer, is there?
No, there isn't. But the pursuit of a more peaceful world has to continue. And ambitious ideas like the Global Peace Alliance, laid out in this source, offer at least a potential roadmap. It hinges on collective action and a real commitment to building that lasting stability we all hope for.